Okay, so today we're going to go over some Samba settings. As we mentioned in one of the previous videos about sharing files from Linux to your network, we wanted to go over some additional Samba settings so that your share is secure, stable, and working properly. So let's take a look at a couple easy and simple Samba configuration settings that you'll want to make on your Samba share. So to get to the settings file, we will want to go to Computer, etc. We'll go down to Samba, and the file that we're interested in is smb.conf. We'll also want access to a terminal, and you'll also want access to the sudo command. So right away, what we are going to do is stop the Samba service, which is called smb.d. Okay, so sudo systemctl stop smb.d service. So you might be tempted to edit the smb.conf file from the GUI from here. The issue with this is that the permissions are not very user-friendly. You do need sudo to modify this. So if we attempt to modify this and save it, the save button here is not available because it's opened read-only. We would need a higher privileged user to open this, which we can do from the terminal. So let's go to this location. And if we want to edit the file with a GUI text editor, you can go to the terminal and use gedit. Remember, put sudo in front of gedit and select the file. And now we have an available save button and it's not read-only. And we can go ahead and we can modify the settings in here. So let's quickly just go over the settings that we do have in here from our previous video where we only enabled a user to be able to access the share that we created on the desktop. Okay, so for our global settings, so these are the settings that would apply to all shares that are set up within Samba. So we have one setting here is the workgroup is workgroup. Now this is typically the default workgroup that most Windows machines ship with. It is pretty typical and it is the default. Okay, the server string. So this is how this machine is identified. In the description, it is your host name, server, Samba Ubuntu. You can change this to whatever you'd like. Okay, so we can see some additional settings here, such as this one here. If we enable this, we can see it's commented with a semicolon. So if we look at what this means, it means that it's different from the default, but it is still a proposed option. Okay, so we don't necessarily need this. If you have multiple NICs on your machine and you only want Samba to operate on one specific NIC or a specific network connected to that NIC, you can use this option to specify which NIC it would be useful on. Okay, the log file here specifies where you can find your log file, how big of the log file can get before it is overwritten or a new log file is created. And your panic action, this is typically just an email. You can go and take a look at the script that is in this directory here. Okay, so we can see here a couple of options to obey PAM restrictions. Yes, you don't typically need this when we're using encrypted passwords, which we should enable. But because I don't think it is enabled by default, they have obey PAM restrictions set to yes by default. Unix password sync, your change passwords program, what is going to be used to change the password, which will be PAM. Okay, so one of the first options here we want to change is map to guest equals bad user. Basically, this says if there isn't a user within the Samba system, the user will be directed to a guest account, which would have access to a share. So we should be setting this to never if you only want authenticated users that have an account in Samba to be able to access the shares. So most of the stuff we don't typically care about for a very easy and simple SMB share. So user share allow guests equals yes. Basically, this just says if you're a user on this Linux system, you will be able to create a share in your home directory like we did in our home directory. Although we are administrators, we have user share access. If you have multiple users on here, you can allow them or disallow them from creating shares to get files out on the network by granting them access to the user share group or not. Okay, so now we're down and into our shares. So before we get here, there are some things that we want to add to our default setup here that I like to add. Under the global heading, one of them that we're going to want to add under networking, mind you, this space here isn't really anything, it's just a comment. You don't have to put the networking stuff under the networking heading or the browsing and identification items under this section here. I could put networking in line 33 and it would work perfectly fine. What I like to do is I like to add hosts allow equals, and then I like to put my own network subnet here because I'm only going to be allowing machines on my network to connect to this for the share. I'm not sharing out over a VPN or anything like that. So we'll put 192.168.0.0/24. And then just for extra measure, I also like to add hosts deny everything else. So this is basically saying every IP that tries to connect to this, if it's not in the 192.168.0 network, don't allow it to connect. So if you have a VPN that you're going to be connecting to this Samba share with, and that's coming from an external IP address, you may want to configure this slightly differently. Then the next networking thing I like to add are some socket options. These are for performance tuning. And typically I just stick with these three. I have configured these enough times that I know that these are the three major ones, in my opinion, that work the best to get the best performance out of your Samba share. Okay, so TCP no delay, SO receive buffer, and we're going to set this to, depending on how much memory you have and how fast your network is. I've had pretty good luck with 131.072. And then we're going to do the same for the send buffer. Then in the browsing section, depending on how you like to have these show up, I like to have the additional control for how my shares appear on the network by default. So if you just open up your network in Windows, you may see this machine. You can double click it, and whether your shares appear or not can be controlled from your global standpoint by setting a default here. So if you don't specify this option, which is going to be browsable equals no. So basically this is saying if you don't specify whether your share is browsable or not, it will not be browsable. So when you see this on your network and you click on this machine, no shares will be there for you to access. It's not saying that you can't access them, it's just not there when you browse to this machine over your network. So when we define a share, we have to set the option browsable yes if we want to be able to click on this machine in our network and see that share available for us to access. And if we don't see it there available to access because we set it to browsable no, or we haven't defined it and it's captured by this global setting, we can still access it by going to that machine and then entering the full path to the share. Okay, and then the last option that I like to use, we'll set under authentication, and the option is going to be encrypt passwords equals yes. Basically, this option allows the server to determine whether or not encrypted passwords will be negotiated with the client. So you want to set this to yes because you don't want a man-in-the-middle attack on your network, possibly someone snooping on the network or some third party being able to see what the password was because it's set to plain text. Having this encrypt passwords equals yes kind of just overlaps this obey PAM restrictions option, but we're just going to leave it there anyways. There's not really any detriment in having it there or removing it. Okay, and then one additional setting that I like to set, or actually a couple, are server multi-channel support. So this allows your CPU to use multiple logical processors to send and receive files. Without this option, if you have an 8-core processor, only 1 core would be used when you're sending and receiving files. Whereas with this option, you can use all 8 if you'd like. So we'll put that underneath the global settings at the top. And this does increase the available bandwidth and speed significantly. Okay, and then AIO read size equals 1. And then the same thing for write, AIO write speed or size, sorry, equals 1. And we'll save this. So if we scroll down to the bottom here, we are ready for defining our shares. And you'll see here that the share that we created on the desktop isn't in the share definitions here. And we can see this through a shell. We can take a look at our smb status -- shares, and we can see that there are no shares from SMB. However, if we take a look at our net user share, we can see that we have a shared folder on the desktop of our Techworks user that is accessible. And that's because we have enabled user shares in the settings here. So the shared definitions are individual files that are placed in a directory on our server. Okay, so if we navigate over to var lib and then go down to Samba, we have a user shares directory here. And this is where our share definitions are for each share that we create with that user or whatever user that we are using. So we can open up this and we can see here that our path to our shared folder on our desktop is there, and the user share ACL, guest OK is no, share name. So that's going to match all of the options that we placed on the directory on our desktop. So if we look at the properties of this, we can go to share. We can say that this is the folder that's shared. Allow others is false, so no, and no guest access, which matches here. And if we change the shared name here, it would reflect on line 6 here. Okay, and these are going to line up with the permissions that our ACL has. So if we wanted to create an additional share, say we want to create a new share and create a new folder. Okay, once we have our folder, we can click on local network share. We can select share this folder. We'll rename it to new share added. So we didn't have a name for our folder there. So we can see here that our directory name and the share name will be different. So let's give it a name first, then we'll go to properties. Okay, now that the directory has a name, we'll enable sharing, and we can call it network share, or we can have it named something else. Let's just shorten that. And you'll want to be aware that there is a limit to the amount of characters that you can have for the share name. I believe it is 15. Let's take a look. I think that's probably too long. Too long. Yep. So it looks like 12 is the maximum that you can have. So let's just name it netshare. I'll modify. And then when we go to our directory here, we'll see that we have a new share file called netshare. And if we take a look at it, it leads us exactly to our share here. So this is a part of the Samba suite for Linux. It's meant to match the Windows Samba and net command. So this portion here is pretty standard and limited on the options that you can provide here. So the other options you'll want to contribute to inside of the smb.conf. And if you want to make a share more permanent or not specifically a simple user share, then also go to the smb.conf and configure it there. So we can take a look at that quickly. We should open it through here. Okay, so at the bottom of the smb.conf, we can define our shares through here. So if you wanted to define this desktop network share or this shared folder here through SMB, we can do that in this portion of the smb.conf as well. So the advantage to this is it's a little more permanent. It's managed by administrator users, and you have a little more options on what that share looks like and the tasks that can be performed and stuff like that. For instance, we could add a recycling bin to these shares. So if something gets deleted through SMB, it actually doesn't get deleted, it just gets forwarded to a recycling bin space that's on the SMB server. That comes in really useful and handy, especially when you have many users connecting to the shares. It is something that I've implemented in my own server. So for instance, if we wanted to take this shared folder here, we can configure that. We can configure that here. Let's say this is the Techworks share. We'll go through this quickly. Okay. And the path is going to be and guest is no, and browsable, we can say yes. We want this to show up on our network when we connect to this machine. Okay, the create mask so when we create a file on here, it'll come with a permissions mask of 600, which means read and write on all directories just for the user that created them. And the directory mask, same thing, it's just read, write, execute, so you can go into a directory just for the user. Okay, so we want to add a few options as well. We want this to be a writable directory. Okay, and we'll also want to make this available. So available, yes or no, won't affect whether it shows up in your network list as browsable. It just won't be available to read and write from. It'll still show up there though. Okay, and then let's configure our recycling bin. So we want to make a virtual file system of recycle. Okay, this enables the recycling virtual file system. So if we don't put any other options here, it'll automatically create a .recycle folder when we delete a file. But we want to be able to specify where those deleted files are going to go. So for now, we can say recycle, and the repository for those files is going to be home Techworks dot deleted. Okay, so this will create a dot deleted directory, and any files deleted will be put into that directory. And for me, I would like to have the file tree automatically created. So if we delete a file, it will be put into the same file tree that it was deleted from, and not just a file in the directory. And we want to do this so that we know if we delete a file by accident and a week later we come back and we go, oh, where is this file from? We can find out. So recycle keep tree. Okay. We also want to touch the files when they're deleted so that they are stamped with a date. We want to keep versions of the files. And then we want to exclude the recycling directory. And if we want to permanently delete something, we can go into the recycling directory and delete it, even if it's shared. So we don't want to put files deleted from the recycling bin into the recycling bin. It would be an infinite loop. So you don't have to specify this if your directory isn't shared, because this only works for when these files are deleted through Samba. If you delete them from Ubuntu, like through the GUI, from the machine itself, or through terminal without going through Samba share, they'll be deleted. They won't be moved to this recycle directory. So in my particular case on my server, I will be sharing an entire directory, and the recycling bin directory will be within that share. So we want to exclude the .deleted directory from being recycled. Otherwise, we'd never be able to permanently delete files by using Samba, which may or not be a good idea in your situation. In mine, it works fine. My server is headless and keyboardless. It's got power and an Ethernet cable, and that's it. So I don't really log on to it to manage the files. I do most of the file management through Samba for everything that I'm managing files on. And then we want to specify the max size that we can keep in the recycle. And we're going to put 0 just for any size file. Okay, that should be it. Now we want to specify which users are allowed to write to this directory. And I'm going to say anyone in the Techworks group. If you want access to this share and you want to be able to write to it, then you have to be a part of the Techworks group. And I think that should define our share. I'm used to VI there, so let's save it, and then we will restart Samba. Okay, and then so before we continue, we just need to install the recycling modules. So we can do sudo apt-get install Samba and VFS. And these will be all the packages to support our virtual file system for recycling. Okay, so if we go over to our Windows and we see our share, we can go to the IP address of our machine. And here are the files that are available on there. Now, if we delete one of these files, we can go back to our Linux system. And if we go into our .deleted folder, which is hidden there, let's see, show hidden, we can go .deleted, and there's our document that we deleted. So eventually you'll want to have some sort of way to delete these. So in my personal projects and my Samba shares, I've set a cron job to delete any files out of this directory that have been here for longer than 1 month or 30 days. So every 30 days, well, every day it checks for files that have been here for more than 30 days, and then it permanently deletes them. So you don't get a recycling bin that's too large. And if you do need to recover a file that was accidentally deleted within Samba, you can come here and recover it. Okay, so I hope this has helped you out. Maybe gain some confidence in how to use Samba and how to configure it, and in your daily life using Linux. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!